This is the first video of the journal entry series. In this and the next video, I'm going to walk you through on how to create a master table that helps us create our journal entries. This is not intended to be used in real-life accounting practice, but you can definitely get some insight when creating your own accounting apps or whatever accounting programs. Here is the disclaimer and the timestamps for this video. Very first step is to create a tab with the name Master, and simply pick a table, copy and paste the toolbar to the Master tab. Remember to copy the title to the same cell reference, which is cell F2 in the Master table. Go to cell D5 and type out all the fields that we need to generate the journal entries. Here we start off with joining the 5 tables. They are expense, income, fund transfer, payment, and receipt. You notice that all of them have the reference column. We're going to link up these tables using their reference columns. So I put in reference here. Then I create the lookup table column to generate a switcher that points to the specific tables when we scroll down the row. This technique is covered in details in these 2 videos. I'm not going to go too deep here, just to speed things up. If you want to know the in and out of the switcher technique, feel free to jump to those videos. Alright, from the customer invoice interface, we know that the description column contains the general ledger account for the income transaction, right? It's the same case for the expense transaction when you see the description column again inside the vendor invoice interface. That's why I include the description column in our master table. For the fund transfer, I'm going to include the withdrawal bank and deposit bank column as they contain the GL account number for the bank accounts involved in the interbank transactions. I need the positions columns to hold the GL accounts. Here I just put 6. We can always add or delete them as we progress. Let me create a table for the master interface. Now we are going to link up the reference of the 5 tables that we mentioned before so that we can put it all under the master table's reference column. From the expense tab, which is also the vendor invoice interface, we've created a reference. You can refer to this episode on how we create it. Then we move on to the customer invoice. Here you see that we also create a reference, and it's just appending to that of the expense interface. The expense ends at 4 and the income starts at 5. Usually I'll just copy the income reference formula and paste that to the next one, which is the fund transfer interface. Here I find that it's easier for me to move on when I rename the expense and income tables. So I go back to the name manager and rename the 5 tables accordingly. Now I go back to the fund transfer and redo the fund transfer reference column formula. If the withdrawal bank ref is a dash, that means nothing. Then the reference returns a dash, otherwise, I'll just roll a sequence down the row. Usually, I'll just put some text, let's say row, hit enter, and see what I get. Now you see the row for the top 4 rows, right? I need to change this row into a number sequence that appends to the maximum of the income reference column. Now you can see reference 7 to 10 are added on top of the reference 5 in the income interface. Follow the same way for the 4th table, payment. When the vendor ref is not a dash, then I'll append the number sequence on top of the bank reference column. For the 5th table, receipt, when the customer ref is a dash, I roll over on top of the payment reference column. Under the master table reference, I'm using the row method to generate a sequence. Here we only need to roll up to the maximum number of the receipt reference. That's why I put a dash for the number more than that. For the lookup table, I make use of the ifs method in addition to the reference we just create. If the reference number is within the max and min of the expense reference, then it returns the string expense. And we do that for all the 5 tables from the bookkeeping interface. This is a long formula, and I made a mistake. So after it's fixed, I get a formula like this. And you should see the table names laid out nicely under the lookup table column. Before we move on, I modified the positions columns that include free debits and free credits. I put in the text like EXP, bracket INC, that kind of thing to help me visualize what the journal entries look like. I'll replace those texts with formulas in the later stage. Here for the description, if the lookup table is either expense or income, I will look up for the general ledger account from the lookup table description column, where the master reference table reference is matched with the reference of the target table's reference column. For example, when the master table reference is 1, I trace to the expense table description column using the reference 1 from the master table that corresponds to the expense table's reference 1. If the master table reference is 5, I trace to the income table description column using the reference 5 from the master table that corresponds to the income table's reference 5. If the reference is nil, then the description column also returns nil. The withdrawal bank formula is very similar to that of the description. We only change the lookup criteria inside the OR bracket. Here we initiate the lookup of the withdrawal bank column when the lookup table is bank, payment, or expense. And my target column is now the withdrawal bank column. Then you should see me extracting the general ledger account of the banks under the withdrawal bank column. They are simply the withdrawal bank columns from the expense, bank, and payment interface. Alright, we do the same for the deposit bank column. Here I just changed the lookup table column condition to include the receipt and income interface, where my target column is now the deposit bank column. Again, is just looking up the deposit bank from the income, bank, and receipt interface.